asking me to admit AI reading. Should I do that? I'm assuming I should.
You can. Yeah, I'm not sure whose it is. It might be mine, but go for it. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, we're started, Jen, if you want to kick it off.
Okay, I was going to say, do you want to wait just another minute since we have just a few folks here and there? Oh, that's Read AI that was coming in. Or do you want to just go ahead?
I think in the sake of everybody's time to be considerate, we should go ahead and start.
Sounds like a plan. All right. Good morning, folks. Thank you for coming today and joining us with this master class, part of our workshop series that's going on this summer. I guess it's still summer. Fall is not officially here yet. Just usual welcome. How's it going? And for those of you who are not familiar with the Maine Community Development Association, we call it MCDA for short. We love those acronyms. So MCDA's purpose is to provide forums to increase awareness and foster communication relating to community development issues and concerns, and provide education and training through workshops. So that's what we're doing here today. Kristen has done a fantastic job in pulling taking care of the logistics end for the workshops, and I'm going to turn it over to her. And again, thank you all for coming.
Oh, sorry. Normally we do this in reverse. So thank you very much. Tora Johnson has graciously agreed to facilitate our class today on engaging the community, tactics and tools for meaningful, inclusive community outreach. We all know that that is critical through the entire development process and housing process, and making sure that everybody is fully engaged and aware. And with that, Tora, if you want to do a quick intro and then go right into it, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So let me, first of all, I'll just explain who I am, and then in a sec, I'll share my screen. So my name is, as has been noted, Tora Johnson, and I am currently a co-director of the Sustainable Prosperity Initiative with Crystal Hitchings, who I just see popped up at the Sunrise County Economic Council. Before that, until 2023, I spent 20 years working at University of Maine at Machias. I'm a social scientist and a geographer, and you'll hear a bit about my work, but primarily my work involves working with communities to grapple with change and help them choose their paths and move forward. So I do a lot of climate resilience. I do a lot of community development projects, and helping people who are, either in conflict or might find themselves that way. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen and give you a little bit of let's see. I'm not used to Teams. Here we go. Hopefully it'll work. There we go. All right. Hopefully you're seeing my slideshow. And if I go, okay, great. I don't know if I get a preview anywhere. Yeah, this is me. A little bit about Sunrise County Economic Council, really quick. Our focus is in Washington County here in Maine, and we have a number of different departments. I'm in the Sustainable Prosperity Initiative, which is under natural resource economies. We also have a community development program and several other programs that are meant to support economic development and community resilience. The Sustainable Prosperity Initiative specifically is regional initiatives around resilience and well-being of people and ecosystems, and a number of sort of tactics that we use to get there. So we'll talk about those. And just full disclosure, I am no morning person, so I'm still like waking up. So just bear with me. So very quickly, here's what we're going to cover today. And it's super ambitious with the short time that we have together. And so don't be surprised if some of it is truncated off the end. But we want to talk about some key concepts around engaging effectively. I know that the basis of this masterclass series is around housing, but these tools can work anywhere. We'll try to talk a little bit about, how it might apply in promoting housing development in your communities, but it's really applicable broadly. We're going to talk about dignity, which is sort of fundamental to best practices around engaging, which may seem weird, but we'll get to that. We'll talk about readiness for change and hope, so how those things go together, and we'll talk about social capital, which you probably have already talked about, but I might be asking for you to, which you might be aware of, but I'll ask you to think about it in different ways. And then we're going to talk about some really important practices for engagement, and sort of try to unpack them and give you guys an opportunity to sort of talk about that. We have provided you in the chat with a couple of links. One is to this guide, which is I'm not sure if it's only sharing my tab, but that's fine.
So Tori, they're not in the chat yet. If they were put in before the meeting started, I don't think they're coming through. So Kristen is taking care of that now. So if you're looking for them, folks, they'll be right there. Okay, thank you very much.
So thank you, Kristen. So the Dignity Guide has a lot more information about the concepts we're going to talk about. It's common for me to do, 4 to 8 hours of training. In a month, I'm going to go down to Annapolis and do 2 full days of training on this stuff. So we're only going to scratch the surface. But there's a lot more information in the guide that accompanies this training, including references, so you can go deeper on anything that's useful to you. Also, there's a handout, and Kristen, if you would put that in the chat, which is essentially a two-page pager with the basic dignity concepts, which we'll get to in a minute. All right, and so a couple of things with this workshop that I wanted to bring up. First of all, this is not television. So I'm gonna be asking you guys to weigh in. And so feel free, first of all, to unmute and speak, or use the chat to weigh in. And this sort of training is a lot more effective if you do 2 really key things. One is to use the opportunity to reflect on what you're doing, right? You can sort of sit and let all the information wash over you, but it's unlikely to actually change anything you do unless you're really thinking about how you might apply it. And so I'll be asking you to do that, and ask questions, get engaged, right? I'm very familiar with this material, and if you're not understanding something, it's likely I've just glossed over it and somebody else is sitting there wondering what I'm talking about too. So don't be shy and ask questions. Okay, so I'm wondering if and I don't want to take a lot of time on this right now, but I'm wondering if this definition of community engagement works for you. So this is something I got from a commonly referenced work called Principles of Community Engagement. It was developed by the CDC, the US CDC, but it's commonly used broadly. And this is how they define it: the process of working collaboratively with and through groups of people to address issues affecting the well-being of those people. So what would you change about this definition, or do you agree with it? This is the first test to see if you guys are listening.
I think I saw a thumbs up come through there.
Yeah.
I don't like, for me, I don't think I would change it. I mean, I think it's blanket, but it's also the point of this and working collaboratively, bringing that region, bringing the town, the community, all the stakeholders together.
Yeah. And what
It's the process of doing it with people as opposed to for people.
good. Yeah, it's doing it with, right? So a common, and it's sometimes a subtle mistake that people make is they think of collaboration as getting the opportunity to do something to a group of people, right? That's not really collaboration. Collaboration is doing it with. Yeah, Crystal.
The word through is really bothering me.
Mm,
And it feels like you're going through them to the other side and sort of using
yeah.
them. It may be more like a mission statement word. But I would just take it out and just with, keep it
Yeah.
as with. And then that applies to everyone as working with everyone else. It feels like an outside entity is working through,
True.
and
Yeah.
which feels like a mission statement, not a
It feels
Yes.
usy, right?
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
But
Yeah.
how does, just for devil's advocate here, because I'm a troublemaker, but what about the instances where you just have the naysayers who are never going to change their mind because they are specifically looking to dismantle something or to prevent growth?
Yeah.
Isn't that a case for moving through?
Hold that thought, because a lot of what we're going to talk about today gets at exactly that question, right? How do you get people on the same page, essentially, right? Yeah, excellent comments and questions here. Yeah, Jim, what do you got?
Yeah, these definitions are always tricky because they're really tautological. I mean, engagement, collaboration, that those are synonyms. I think in the old days of economic development work, we talked about sort of three levels of participation, that some people participate only by getting the benefits of what you've done,
Yep.
that they didn't actually participate in any other way, but they got higher incomes, and that's good. They're happy with that. Another level was that people would participate through providing information, providing input, being respondents in a survey, something where they're actually having some influence on the process. And the third level was they're actually controlling the process. And I think that those distinctions in participation are probably more useful to me than finding another synonym for engagement and calling it that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, Jim. And we're going to talk about the fact that there are different levels of how much someone can be engaged. And here I just mean that basic dictionary definition of engagement, meaning involved, right? And some people want and should be involved deeply, and other people want only a tangential or peripheral involvement, and some want no involvement at all and just want the benefits, as Jim said. And so we're going to come back to that concept when we talk about how we build a process. So I'm going to move on. And here I would like you guys to reflect, and we'll move through this fairly quickly, on consider some situation, some activity you're doing with a community, with stakeholders, projects you're doing between agencies or organizations, within your staff. I want you to tell me, and it can be in the chat or just sing out, when you see conflict, lack of engagement, or intractability arising in your work, when this happens to you, how does it feel? Just what emotions arise when you're stuck like this, when people are not getting things done and they're arguing? What are the feelings that arise for you?
So for me, frustration,
Yeah, I hear that one a lot.
and I
Yeah.
think sadness and disappointment.
Yeah, it can cause you grief, right? Yeah, what else?
I see Crystal's typing in the chat.
I think personally disappointment is a big one because it kind of
Mm.
is this beginning of a domino effect of different feelings sort of swirling around there, where you feel sadness, maybe like what you're doing isn't worth anyone's time, you know, all of those complicated feelings surrounding it.
Yeah,
Devaluing.
yeah, you feel devalued.
Crystal
Right.
says frustrating and wishing people want to use their ability to work together for the good of the people.
Yeah, you're just here to do good, right? Why is it so hard?
Now, sometimes though, it just makes me wonder why. So what am I missing? Is there something that I'm missing, or is it, just a conflict,
Yeah.
So.
So self-doubt, confusion. Yeah. Some other kinds of emotions that arise. And I expect, by the way, to hear from everyone. You guys are just sitting there drinking your coffee. So we can do this. Some other feelings that I hear arise include self-doubt. Jen just touched on that. And a sense of burnout, anger, insecurity. Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I tend to get angry, and we'll talk a little bit about that. That's something that I commonly feel. So let's turn it on its head now and ask the other question. When you see effective engagement, tractability, you're getting things done, you're working together, you feel the collaboration is working, what emotions arise then? When you're moving forward without conflict, how does it feel when it's working?
We have a few other feelings coming from the chat. Jared said empty. Why am I even bothering? Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So on the flip side, we have excitement, exciting.
Yeah.
So I feel accomplished.
Yeah. You feel proud, motivated, enthusiastic, connected to the people you're working with. Yeah, those are great feelings. Now I want you to reflect really quickly on that and those two kinds of, yeah, you're motivated, you want to keep moving. Those two kinds of scenarios, right? Your ability to do your job, not you're all here because your job is going to make you rich, right? You guys are in it for the money, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Oh,
ready
of
for
course.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, you're not in it for the money. You're here because you want to do good for the world, for your community. And if you're feeling stuck and you're feeling unmotivated, not only is it harmful to you over the time, over time, it can lead to burnout. It can lead to poor psychological health in your work, right? And it's gonna mean it's more likely that you'll leave your job sooner, right? You'll walk away from projects. It's a wasteful and harmful situation. On the other hand, you get job satisfaction, you get motivation. Not only do you get things done, which is the practical reason why you want to do these projects and engage, but it also feeds you, right? And makes it possible for you to continue your job. So that's a really important, if it's not enough motivation that it's actually worthy work, right? Being satisfied in your work is also a worthy goal, and you deserve it. So let's talk about dignity. And I'm going to roll through this pretty quickly because we have so much to talk about, but it's really the fundamental concept at the base of all of the best practices for engagement that we're talking about. So every best practice, when we get to that part of the workshop this morning, every one of the best practices that we talk about and all the others that are listed in that guide, if you unpack them and take them apart, what you find inside them is that the way they work is by protecting and supporting dignity, dignity of individuals and dignity of the ways they interact. So these are my two favorite definitions of dignity, and they may or may not ring true for you. But we all, have a sense of our own dignity. So Jocelyn, this is probably my very favorite, and there are many, many definitions, but she defines it as an inherent characteristic of being human. So it's inside yourself. You feel it as a part of yourself, and it's manifested through behavior that demonstrates respect. That's behavior towards you and behavior that you have towards others, right? So it goes both ways. And Donna Hicks, who wrote this book, which I highly recommend, has a sort of slightly different take, calling dignity an internal state of peace. In other words, if you have a sense of your own dignity, that your dignity is supported and protected, and you have a grip on your own dignity, then you have an internal state of peace. And it arises out of recognizing that you and all living things around you have value inherently, regardless of agreement or right. So basic humanity entitles you to dignity, regardless of whether I disagree with you or you have done something to me that I regard to be, mean or unpleasant or cruel. So dignity does not. Jocelyn and Hicks would argue that about the word respect, right? So there's a basic level of respect for basic human dignity that is necessary to have a dignified set of interactions, right? But you don't, in order to respect basic human dignity, you don't need to agree. So at its most fundamental place, dignity is the sort of foundation of effective interaction. I'm going to say that again. Dignity is the foundation of effective interaction. So how do we get there, right? If we don't have that, we can't get anywhere. I'm going to skip over this. Well, no, I'm going to say one thing about it. So dignity is, as I said, about how you're treated and how you treat others. If I'm mean to Crystal, and and I'm like, get that cat out of there, or what, I don't know what I would say. But if I'm mean to Crystal, right, I'm not only harming her dignity, I'm harming my own, right? So when I fall to a temptation to be mean, to harm someone else's dignity, I actually harm my own dignity. Also, my context determines my sense of my own dignity, right? And I may have a lack of trust and a sense of threatened dignity because of past harms I've experienced, right? And dignity may be interpersonal or structural. So the way a process is structured may be undignified, even if everybody is being very polite, right? And that could be itself harmful. And so these are really important considerations that we'll unpack to the degree that we have time for today. So the elements of dignity, Donna Hicks has very, very helpfully outlined for us. I won't read them all, but these are important concepts to look for in whatever process or whatever interactions you're structuring for what you're trying to get done for your collaboration, right? Do people feel safe? Do they feel included? Are you acknowledging and recognizing acknowledging who they are and what they have to offer, recognizing their expertise. Are you giving people the benefit of the doubt? Are you helping and inspiring others to give each other the benefit of the doubt? And on, right? So all of these elements are what dignity essentially is made of. And then there's what we all struggle with, which is temptations to violate dignity, right? I'm a big bait taker, meaning if I feel my dignity is under threat, I will get my hackles up. I will, I'll speak truth and I get angry, right? That's me. My husband is a big conflict avoider. So there's a little picture of our marriage for the first 20 years. Took some working out for both of us to get real with our temptations. And I get a lot of questions about seeking false dignity and seeking false security. Seeking false dignity is and the Venn diagram of each of these, there's overlap, right? So seeking false dignity, I don't know if you can see this. Yes, I'm going to share this tab instead. Seeking false dignity is here we are. There we go. Is avoiding authentic connection, right? Avoiding wading into important things and working things out with others in order to sort of borrow a false sense of dignity, right? And same with security, right? Not wading into uncomfortable places in order to retain what you believe to be a sense of dignity. Any questions about the elements or the temptations before we go on? Are you starting to see where this might apply to the work that you're doing in terms of engagement?
I've actually seen this, this resonates with me. I was asked to be on a board for a historic society, of very, very old traditional French people. And having a background in fundraising, I brought ideas on how the fundraising and, really show some growth. And it was just nothing. And I just felt I didn't feel recognized or acknowledged. And it went on for months and months and months until finally I just shut down. I'm still on the board, but I don't go to the meetings. I don't engage. I don't there's just no point in it. I just felt so devalued. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great example, Kristen. And I'm sorry that your time was wasted in that way. That sounds very frustrating. So I wonder if we could take just a sec to think about the role of dignity. So we don't have to unpack everything here, but it's worth reflecting on harms you've experienced and how they might be manifesting in the way you show up in the world, right? So for me, I grew up in poverty, and I grew up, at a time when women were not supposed to be professionals and so forth. So I do have a chip on my shoulder as a result of dignity, harms to my dignity that I've experienced. And I have challenges in trusting certain kinds of people that I've had to work on my entire life. And so I can really reflect on, how that manifests, and I try, and sometimes I fail, but I try to overcome my tendencies to violate dignity, my temptations to violate dignity. And a lot of that is has had to rest on my sense of the threats to my own dignity, right? So almost always when we lash out or we shut down or etc., when we do that inappropriately, sometimes it's appropriate to do any of those things, right? But when we do it inappropriately, very often it's rooted in a sense of risk, right? Of threat to our dignity, or it's rooted in a sense of vulnerability because of past harms to our dignity. So do take some time to think about what's important in your world, right? You probably didn't think you were going to come to work today and have psychotherapy, right? I was going to ask you to talk about your feelings, but I am because we never think about it, we never talk about it, but you're sitting around in a meeting and the whole meeting is made of feelings, right? And it's made of the feelings that people talk about and the feelings that they don't talk about. And ultimately, most of those feelings have some relationship to dignity. So reflect on that. I've already shared that my biggest temptation is taking the bait, that I'll rise to the bait every freaking time. What is your challenge? What temptation to violate? You don't have to, and if you don't feel comfortable admitting it, it's okay, but I'm curious what your challenge might be. Avoiding conflict. There's a lot of those out there. That's a common one.
So mine would be when somebody pipes up and says nothing's being done about that. It sets me right off.
That right there is primo bait. Yeah. I have a catalog of bait from my past and that kind of thing. Someone once said, with me sitting in a meeting, I just about tackled them. We need a real social scientist in here.
Wow.
Yeah, that was bait. I rose right to it too. I got really mad.
I think so in the interest of being super self-aware, and I've got a couple of colleagues in here, so this should be fun for me after the meeting. But for me, I think I take the bait, but at the same time, I personally, 'cause I have a similar background, some, crappy stuff happened in my past,
Yeah.
whatever. But I put so much value on the fact that I'm good at this, that if somebody doesn't listen to me, I'm just like, what is your problem? Like,
Yeah.
I know this. I can prove that I know this. Why are you not listening to me? So,
Yeah.
that's probably my trigger there.
Yeah. And Tim said really feedback makes you feel like you're being attacked. Really common, especially for younger people who haven't really lived in the world long enough to really get there. I see this I saw this among certain of my students a lot. I was going to say something. Oh yeah, one of the dynamics that happens a lot, especially when you're working with hot button issues like climate, where people have sort of identity linked beliefs that may or may not be true. And that's always a super major challenge, because if you are the person with the actual expertise and the truth, your dignity and your identity is tied up with that truth, right? So that brings this sort of emotional dynamic. And the fact is that people don't change their beliefs or understand what they, understand truth unless they feel safe and that their dignity is protected. And so by arguing and attacking and taking the bait, you actually undermine what you're trying to do rather than meet them where they are and bring them along. It's a really, really interesting, really, really interesting thing. I wouldn't have taken you for a bait taker, Crystal. That's why you're quiet in there. It's like you're just seething. Yeah, I trigger too, Erin, when I'm not feeling heard, and will often come across as a stiff communicator when I'm, angry because, I feel under threat from the conflict. This is awesome stuff, you guys. And I love this self-reflection and hopefully it's helpful to get there. I want to talk about a few concepts, and I'm just going to plow through them, just going to put them up there so we can move on to talking about the best practices. But these are these are dignity linked concepts that that are important elements in an effective collaboration process or engagement process. So the first is this concept of hope. And an effective process is going to build a collective, a shared sense of hope. It's one thing to
Tora,
have.
I'm sorry, did you mean to go back to the PowerPoint? We're still sharing the
Yes,
handout.
I did. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. There we go. There it is. See, it's a beautiful picture. So building a collective sense of hope involves having three elements: having a goal, right? Or goals. That's a vision, and it is a shared vision, right? I know you guys talked about visioning, and there's a real difference between a vision that you personally have and that is an acknowledged vision for the group with buy-in from the group, right? And the sense that there's a means to get there. Often, people can envision a future, but feel powerless. They may or may not be truly powerless, but feel powerless to get there, or they cannot see the path to get to their goals, right? And so hope is really an important element, and it has to be a shared hope. Otherwise, right, a shared vision, a shared sense of where you're going, a shared sense of agency that we can do this together, and a foreseeable path, a direction to go to get there. These are really critical elements, right? And working in a context of dignity where folks are included and acknowledged, and the goals are adjusted to incorporate their perspectives and to recognize their needs and so on. And the same thing applies to agency, and the same thing applies to pathways, right? That all those things together build a sense of hope. Then, and this is another really critical thing when you're asking a community to change, right? The idea that you're going to have a new housing development, right? And different people may come into your community, and this street may look different than it did, right? That is going to introduce change, different ways of operating your municipal activities or budgets in order to encourage housing development. That is an element of change. And people and I hate it when they move the soup at the supermarket. What makes you think I'm going to be all about changing how my town, looks or operates, right? And so community readiness is a really crucial thing. And that is, again, collective community readiness. If you're up here, you're like ready to go on your project, but you have a bunch of people in your community or in your collaboration down here in denial and resistance, you're not very likely to get up those couple of steps any further, right? This is a process that is shared, and it behooves us to move lower down on the readiness scale, meet people there, and bring them up together. Does that make sense? And the way you get, as I said, people don't change their beliefs, their intentions, or their behaviors in response to being cajoled or insulted or suffering indignity. In fact, it tends to make people step down the ladder of readiness if they're involved in such an environment. Again, cajoling people, insulting them, implying that they're not smart, you know, in doing, in believing what they believe or doing what they're doing, will make them entrenched in doing that, right? But if you meet them where they are and work together to build a shared sense of, you know, where you're going, you have much better hope. All right, one more concept, and then we'll get into, I think this is the last concept, and then we'll get into, oh no, there is one more. Sorry. Then we'll get into best practices. So you probably heard about social capital, and that is the sort of links between people, right? But I want to sort of think about and unpack the concept of social capital, the sort of links, bonds of trust and mutual care and understanding that you build together with people. So one thing that's known as bonding social capital is in-group social capital. So the bonds between people who are part of the same community or part of the same church or part of the same, you know, in-group of whatever form, right? And so, you know, I might think of, you know, I have bonding social capital with folks who live in Machias because that's my town. And Jen has some bonding social capital with folks in East Machias, right? And those are two separate in-groups. But there are people, and in fact, Jen and I are these people, that bridge between those two in-groups, right? And Jen and I do this all the time. Folks like Jen and I are known as boundary spanners. We help to connect and bring resources and ideas and connections and shared goals, et cetera, across the bridge, a bridge between two bonded groups. And so we form bonding social capital. Turns out, and I believe this does say this, that, and that boundary spanner role is a really crucial role. If you are struggling to engage with any sort of group, look for somebody with a foot in that group and a foot in a group that you're in. Very often that person can be really helpful and will have an understanding of both sides of that, that boundary. And we'll have some competency, you know, cultural competency in each. I'm not going to unpack that further, but one really crucial thing is that strong, resilient communities have both bridging and bonding social capital. Overly insulated communities are more brittle because they can't get new resources and new ideas and new people in, right? If they're too insulated. But that said, those tight in-group bonds are crucially important, especially in communities that have endured trauma or poverty or what have you, right? The links that I have with my neighbors, and the closer they are, the stronger, you know, and more resilient we're going to be together. And then Jim said he was influenced by Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed on these matters. I love that. I'm gonna look that one up.
If I can interject, it's particularly on levels of awareness. He was looking at, because there are people who are aware and they have hope, but it's based maybe on something we would consider more mystical. You know, they have hope for the future, kind of a prayer, but not a plan or a strategy. And so I think that distinction was important for him, and he was always building towards critical awareness, a more, I guess, scientific or factual analytical model for how we understand the world.
That's really interesting. It sounds like the kind of thing that probably underpinned the science of hope, right? The sort of picking apart what hope is actually made of. I like that a lot. Thank you, Tim. So I want to talk a little bit about, just briefly, about effective process, so that we understand what it is we're doing when we're trying to get something done and collaborate with people and engage them. So I highly recommend in this book. It's called How to Make Collaboration Work by one of my mentors, David Strauss. It's one of many books on effective collaboration. He's a kind of leading light. He had a whole career in this, and the shared process outline that I have here is an adaptation of David's framework. But the idea essentially is you want to create a process, a collective shared process that moves a group through these steps in order to build hope and community readiness together, all in a context of dignity, right? You need to have a common definition of the problem, right? So I work a lot with whale entanglement and fishing gear, right? So that's a big part of my work. And if you ask a run-of-the-mill fisherman and a run-of-the-mill whale advocate, right, one will say the problem is the other, right? The problem is those environmentalists getting all up in my grill, and the problem is those fishermen, harming the whales. But we can reframe that, we can restructure that and define the problem as whales get entangled in fishing gear, and we need a better way to prevent that, right? And that is an inclusive problem definition. And similarly, we need to look at what a solution might look like. We need to brainstorm and generate possible solutions. We need to evaluate those solutions, and then together we need to decide in a collaborative spirit with a shared, broadly framed set of goals and broadly framed aims. We need to decide together which of those options to choose. And we need to create loops. So an effective process is never just linear. You never, start from the beginning and go through those steps that I just outlined, and then you're done, right? Because what if we try something and this is literally what's happened. What if we try something that is meant to prevent entanglements and keep whales from dying from fishing gear, and it doesn't work as effectively as we need it to be? We need to go back to the beginning of the process. But we've learned a bunch of things, and almost as importantly as what we've learned, we've gotten there together. I have to say the whales situation there's not a lot of togetherness there, but we're working on it. But right, if we continue to loop around, understand what we know, we go back to the beginning and we refine what we've done together, we're building trust and buy-in in the process, and we're building our knowledge in the process by looping around these what we call learning loops. So here's just an idealized process map that I hope would be helpful in thinking about a process that you might undertake in order to have a decision-making process and actually accomplish something around the housing challenges in your community. And notice that these are each of the phases that I mentioned, and that this is a circular process. It's a looping process. And the idea is, and we talked about this with Jim earlier, is that there's a core group, a sort of steering committee, or whatever you want to call it, right? A core group that's fully engaged. And ideally, that core group has representation from broad interests and has some sort of frame of governance to allow it to meet challenges and solve problems together and retain dignity within the process. And then there are others that we need to engage with, right? So there's other folks who really just don't want to or don't need to be deeply involved, but need to be informed or engaged. Their feedback needs to come in, right? Maybe they advise the process because they have certain expertise. We reach out to those folks, and then we come back to the smaller committee. We reach out to regulators or people who fund us, and then come back together. So we go in and out of this broad public phase into a tight-knit steering committee phase. And in each case, we're accountable. Each case, we're saying, here's what we learned last time we talked to you. Here's what we did with this, and here's what we're asking about now, right? And so by doing this, we build those key elements, right? We help increase community readiness, togetherness, buy-in, hope, mutual understanding, etc. So I've covered a lot of this. I'm not going to really get into it, but remember, we're creating an us. We're building readiness by building a sense of shared purpose. We're feeding back. It's part of how we address the element of dignity called accountability, and we're framing at each step to be inclusive for shared purpose, right? And I wanted to point out that the strategic visioning that you guys learned about earlier, right? That's the context in which that strategic visioning happens, right? And team building, that's the context in which team building can happen. So all those concepts that you had, they're rooted in dignified practice and practical structures that address dignity. All right, so, oh my gosh, we're down to 8 minutes for real. So those are the concepts that I wanted to bring up. And I think maybe I'll blow through the best practices and then we'll talk. Okay. Does that sound like a good strategy for our final 8 minutes? So some of the best practices, and again, these are outlined in the Serving with Dignity guide with much greater depth and lots of references. But some key best practices for the kinds of things you guys are doing, and there are others, but these are the ones that Kristen and I came up with that might be most relevant. First of all, identifying local priorities and vulnerabilities. They may not match, first of all, your own expectations or what you have as your vulnerabilities and priorities. But if you don't do this and you don't frame around, which is the next best practice, around, local folks and what they need, say they need, and what they care about, they're unlikely to hitch their wagon to your star, right? You need a wagon that makes sense, or you need a star that makes sense for them, right? That they can see would get them where they need to go, not where you think they need to go. Right. And so very often you can reframe what you're doing around their perspective. And I have an example here. These are the results of a survey that I did several years ago, asking municipal officials about what's important in their communities and to them personally. And the context was understanding climate change, what their interest in doing things about climate resilience. And needless to say, the literal last things on the list were climate change and global warming, right? But look at this, the ones highlighted in red: emergency response, heating, repair of roads and improvement of roads, etc. All of these are very climate resilience related things. And all of a sudden, we can not talk about climate change, but we can talk about improving these things for this community, because this is what they said they cared about. So think about how you can reframe and both identify, like find ways to identify what the local concerns are and reframe around their needs. You also can avoid conflicted frames. So the example I just gave you is a good example where we didn't have to talk about climate change. We could just talk about what was important, right? We don't even need to mention the words climate change to talk about how we respond to emergencies in our community, or how we help people pay for their heating fuel, or, insulate their homes, right? That's avoiding conflicting frames and digging into dignified approaches. And then I believe this is the last one I had for you. Acknowledging past indignity and trauma. Don't pretend it didn't happen, right? that's a common thing to do. Well, we're talking about housing here. It doesn't really matter that, you know, that budget crisis last year made you angry at me. It actually does matter, right? That is an element here. And pretending that it's not only is it undignified and exclusionary, you know, by dismissing someone's concerns, it's also means that you're blocking your way forward for this issue specifically, because people, you know, are unlikely to change their beliefs, change their behaviors, and buy into what you have going on because you haven't done the work to find mutual understanding, right? So looking for ways to show good faith and listening and acknowledging and taking the time that you need to process those things is really important. So, okay. Oh yeah, Trinity of voice. And another thing that folks who feel excluded often have a sense, and you'll hear code words. Jen and Crystal and I are working on a project right now where we hear these all the time about access, standing, and influence. It's called the Trinity of voice. That's how Seneca has termed it. So if you're evaluating a process, ask yourself, do people have access to it? Genuine opportunity to participate in ways that are appropriate to them, the right levels that we talked about? Do they have standing? In other words, if you hear something from them, are you willing to change what you do, how you do it, what you believe, how you talk about it, or not? And do you offer, sorry, that's influence. Do you offer them the respect that they are due and legitimacy? So let's talk about, and scale is important. We won't have time for that, but I wonder if we can take the last couple minutes and muse on these questions. What did you find useful today? So short. Like I said, I'm not used to doing this in less than a few hours. Anything you plan to change, and what might be challenging about that, and what's exciting? And what questions do you have? So we have a couple minutes. Any reflections on what we learned today?
I think the most useful thing that I've learned is that I'm not the only one who gets frustrated by the same situations within this role. It makes me feel a little better
Oh, good.
about it.
Yeah, you are far from the only one. There's a reason why I do one of these trainings like once a week. It's a really, really prevalent challenge. Yeah, especially in the climate that we're living in today, right? We're in a very polarized climate, which means that folks are really dug in, and especially public servants are beleaguered for sure. Yeah,
I
Jen.
think, go ahead. I think personally, there's a lot of emphasis put on, being professional and what modern society sort of sees as professional.
Yeah.
But making connection is often seen as, unprofessional, like meeting someone where they're at, where in fact, I think that it's a good symbol of like a true professionalism to be able to take away the jargon and seek that sense of connection over pretending to be some sort of, I guess, paragon of professionality. And I think you talked about that and the subtle nuances between like professionalism and connection and being a person, like a decent human being to other people and having your foot in both worlds. And I really liked that.
Yeah, Hope, that's so important. And I talk a lot about this, especially with people who work for government, right? They have a sense, they wear their professionalism like it's armor. And if you're wearing armor and you're covered in steel, no one can get in and they can't see that you're human. And that has a couple of issues. One is, as you point out, connection. The other is it gives people permission to attack you, right? People feel entitled because you're not a human being anymore, right? And there's no way without connection to do hard things, right? So professionalism in the sense that you always behave with dignity and you are accountable for your work. Those are professional values, right? But if you're wearing your professionalism like it's armor, you're going to fail and you're going to be all by yourself in that armor, right? It's a very lonely place to be. And Jim, you had something. I know we're
Yeah,
over.
of course, the phone rang. I think something I'm trying to figure out is, we live, it's pretty well documented. We live in an era of distraction right now, and cell phones, all phones, cars, everything are computers. And I think that a lot of the reaction we have to asking for involvement now is distraction. People pretty quickly forget you even invited them to participate. And it's very clear the distraction is being used at the federal level right now to take our minds off of important matters by just throwing things at us left and right that may not be that important, but they're distracting.
Mm-hmm.
And there was Marx talked about religion being the opiate of the masses, and that was actually a fairly insightful comment, the way he made it. But I think distraction is the new opiate of the masses. There's always scrolling.
There's always scrolling. Well, and that competition for attention is an important element of the landscape. But and I am a hammer, and so everything's a dignity nail. The way to break through that distraction is to meet people where they care, right? So what pulls people away from those phones or away from those distractions is things that they think in their mind, I really, really wish I had a way to deal with this, or I'm really, really concerned about that. And lowering the bar to bringing them in, right? So making it easy for them to enter the room and safe for them to remain and rewarding for them to participate, right? And not rewarding by your definition, but rewarding by them, which means you have to do the first part, which is often the hardest, which is asking, what do you care about? Right. And also there's also the assuming that people know what they care about. They don't always, but but you can get a start that way. And that's, that can be really effective. And I do see it overcoming a lot, not only distraction, but overcoming genuine, like deep distrust and that sort of thing. Yeah. If you need to go, I will not be insulted, but I'm also happy to stay and chat with anyone who wants to stick around and discuss these issues. As you can guess, I could talk about them all day.
Thank you, Tora. I'm going to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tora, as always, you have been an amazing speaker, and I think we all have so much to learn from you and the concepts that you always present.
Well, good. Hopefully it's relevant to the context and excellent. Great.
I think it was, Tora. Thank you so very much. Wonderful class. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. And thanks for all your thoughtful input, you guys. That was awesome. I always, learn a little something and get new ideas of ways to discuss it by having these conversations. Yay. And now I need more coffee.
Thanks, folks. I appreciate it.
I think we'll go ahead and end the webinar today. Once again, thank you so much, Tora. We appreciate you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.